Hey guys, it's Shaylin. I'm here today with another video. So today's video is really exciting. I'm going to be answering some questions about MFAs. I'm currently in my first semester of my MFA program, which is my Master's of Fine Arts in Writing. Obviously an MFA could be in lots of different artistic disciplines, but in the writing community, we usually just say an MFA. And I did my BA in writing from 2015 to 2019, and then took a few years off, and I've been wanting to go back to school ever since. So it's really, really exciting to be at this point in my life. As soon as I said that I was doing my MFA, I got a lot of requests for a video answering questions about it, which makes sense because I'm sure if you're considering an MFA, which I'm sure a lot of you guys might be, this could be really, really valuable intel. So I'm going to try and answer as many of the questions as I can. So this might be a really, really long video. I've grouped the questions together based on the topic. So like all the questions about applications, all the questions about thesis, etc., etc. And then I'll have a bunch of kind of misc questions that didn't really fit in a category at the end as well. Before I get into this video, I just have a couple quick things I want to say. First of all is about my channel. I'm a grad student. I'm super busy. This might be one of the busiest semesters of my degree because I have to do a giant funding application, which we'll talk about later. I'm in an extra class. I'm taking 3 classes. Unfortunately, YouTube really punishes you if you do not post regularly. I posted a couple vlogs back in September, I think, and I don't think they showed up in the majority of people's subscription boxes. Because I'm not going to be posting super regularly, YouTube really doesn't like that. And so if you want to see my videos, I would recommend turning on notifications. Now that I'm not at Reedsy anymore, which was my job that I was doing before I started my graduate degree, I have more time to make videos just for myself. As you can imagine, I was spread a little thin making videos for work and then also for myself. But now I'm hoping I have the energy to make some more in-depth content. I'm so busy, it's not going to be on a weekly basis. A couple other things. I know some people might be curious about where I'm going to school. What school are you at? That's not something I'm going to disclose, and the reason for that is for my personal safety. When I was in my undergraduate degree, I was stalked. I ask that if you know where I go to school from context clues or because you go to my university and you've seen me on campus, if you see anyone asking where I go to school, that you please not tell them. If I see any comments revealing my location, I will not only delete them, but I will block you from my channel. This is a very important boundary for me to draw. The other disclaimer that I want to make here is that I know there are a lot of people who are very intensely and vocally anti-MFA. This video is about my experience. When I was in my undergrad, whenever I would talk about my writing degree, I would get the most batshit insane comments and videos made about me. People would basically hear me saying, this was my experience. And they would go, I hate the MFA program, or I hate academia writing degrees, so therefore everything you're saying is wrong. You're saying you had a positive experience, actually you're wrong, and that actually damaged you horribly. And anytime I would try to speak with nuance, because no one's gonna go through a 4-year degree and have 100% positive experience the whole time, and I would say, yeah, I had an overall positive experience, but here was kind of a negative thing, maybe, that I had to work through. They're like, ha, writing degrees are the worst thing ever, and make video responses calling me slurs. I wish I were joking, and I wish I was speaking to an isolated incident. It frankly made talking about my degree a miserable experience. I am only talking about myself. If you had a negative experience doing an MFA, that's perfectly valid. It doesn't invalidate my positive experiences. Believe it or not, I'm a different person than you. And believe it or not, I am actually capable of assessing and understanding my own life and my own experience better than you, a stranger who doesn't know me and wasn't there. I don't know why this is a topic that sets people off so much, but it really is one. And so I would just like to say, as a reminder, I am talking about my personal experience. Your personal experience may differ from mine, but it doesn't mean that my understanding of my experience is wrong. If you're anti-MFA, I have an incredibly easy solution for you. It's called don't get an MFA. Not getting an MFA is perhaps the easiest thing you will ever do, because all you have to do to not get an MFA is nothing. If you personally went to writing school or did your MFA and it was a bad experience, that's totally valid. This is not a good experience for everyone, and I'm not making this video to say you should get an MFA. I am answering the questions that were asked to me, and I am speaking from my own personal experience. If you hate MFAs, simply don't watch the video and go live your life. That said, if you're watching this because you want to do your MFA, please do further research on everything that I say. I can only speak from my personal experience, and it's going to change dramatically based on your school. So I'm going to start with all of the questions that kind of fell under this category of why. Why do you want to get an MFA? A lot of these questions are somewhat similar, but I just kind of grouped them all together. So why get an MFA? One of the main reasons I wanted to get an MFA is just simply because I wanted to. For some reason, it feels like people are always looking for a very obvious logistic answer. Oh, I wanted to get this education because then I could get this exact job. I had a really positive experience doing my undergraduate degree. I felt incredibly immersed and inspired in that environment, and I wanted more of that. I knew it was an experience that I would enjoy and that I would find fulfilling and valuable, both as a person and as a writer. As well, I just really wanted a change in my life. I'd been doing the same job for a really long time, and I was starting to feel really unfulfilled. And the job market is just absolutely a hot mess right now. And so in terms of wanting a change in my life, it made more sense to go back to school than to try and find another job. As well, and I'll touch on this later, I did want to open the door to teach in the future. In the writing world, an MFA is a finishing degree, and so you can teach writing with an MFA. I am fully aware that those kind of tenured professor jobs are incredibly rare, and I'm not necessarily even seeking that in my life. Just being able to open the door to work as an instructor alongside hopefully some writing income feels like it would be a really, really good avenue for me to have. I have dedicated my life to writing. I really have decided that this is what I want to spend my life doing, and I want to be the best possible that I can be at it, and I want to study it to the deepest extent that I can study it. It was a natural step to get my MFA because to me, it's just another aspect of immersing myself in writing as fully as I can. A lot of people get an MFA because they want to write a larger project for their thesis and they want guidance or deadlines doing that. Now, I do want the guidance and the support for the writing of my thesis. I'm a little different from a lot of people because a lot of people come into an MFA because they want to write their first large project, say like their first novel. In my time off between degrees, I wrote 4 novels. I don't need it for deadlines, right? Or motivation or giving me the structure to write a novel. That's a little different for me, but it is a common reason for an MFA that a lot of people pursue an MFA is because they want to write their first large project. And they want extra level of structure in doing that. There's some other factors as well, but I think they'll be covered by some other questions, so I'm just gonna leave that one at that for now. When/how did you know you were ready to pursue an MFA and that it was the right decision for you? I first realized I wanted to get my MFA during my undergrad. Going into my undergrad, grad school was not on my mind. I didn't know that this was an option. During my undergrad, I was exposed to the existence of MFAs as an option. And as I got later into my degree, I started really, really thriving in that environment. And I realized that it was something that I wanted to pursue. So I first realized that I wanted to go to grad school probably around 3rd year of my undergrad. What do you expect to get out of an MFA program as far as your craft is concerned? If I remember correctly, it's also a step forward towards your goal of teaching, but that aside. So I think this is a really interesting question. In some ways, I can't answer that. I think it's important to recognize that with writing, you learn the concepts of writing in the early years of your undergraduate degree, or you learn them yourself. And from that point onwards, it's just writing. And it's just continuing to kind of clarify and crystallize that in your own application. It's not like there are more advanced concepts that you get to learn in an MFA that you don't get to learn in an undergrad. So I can't really tell you specific craft things I want to learn or improve because in many ways, one reason I want to go back to school is to learn what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know that I don't know, right? And I want to learn what those things are. In a more concrete way, I want to study a novel academically. I feel like in my undergrad, I got really good at writing a short story. I wrote many a short story, and I was able to work really closely with mentors to write short stories, and I really learned how to write a short story. As a novelist, I'm essentially still self-taught. In my undergrad, I wrote a novel beginning. My undergraduate degree was very focused on short fiction and concepts that apply more broadly. In terms of a novel as like a structural thing, that is something that I taught myself by doing it. So I'm really excited to work with my supervisor on a novel and kind of have that be my focus. Really learn how to write a novel. I think I know how to write a novel, but I was never taught how to write a novel. Does that make sense? I know you've said at some point that you'd be interested in teaching, but what are some other writing/career goals you hope to obtain after completing your MFA, including goals related to your style, efficiency, or overall topics you aim to understand better? I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not a professional degree. It is an artistic degree. And I think sometimes we feel the need to justify it by saying, no, it's for my job, it's for my career, and that makes it okay. But I'll sit here and say, I'm doing this for artistic reasons. I'm doing this because writing is my artistic craft, and it's something that's incredibly important to me and foundational to me as a person, and I want to study it further, and I want to immerse myself in it further. Other than teaching, an MFA in writing doesn't give you a ton of career opportunities, and I think I should be honest about that. That's not the reason I'm doing it. Obviously, I would like to be able to teach. That's a huge thing for me. Yes, it can give you some extra credentials as like an editor. I'm not really looking at a career in publishing, to be honest. I am interested in working in academia as an instructor. That is the main career objective to get an MFA. Other than that, it is more of a personal artistic development thing. And that is, I think, just as valid as a reason to do it. I've heard mixed opinions on writing MFAs, with some saying it's a good way to develop your work and others saying that writing is best developed out in the real world. I've just graduated from college and I'm thinking about my next steps. Curious to hear your thoughts on why you chose an MFA program and why you waited a few years after college to start the program. I'm going to talk about why I waited a few years in a moment, just because there's another question that addresses that, but I wanted to, and I don't want to cover too many things at once because I'll get off topic. I wanted to talk about this idea of getting an MFA versus developing your work in the real world. I see this a lot. Oh, it's better to develop your work in the real world. To that I say, it's not a dichotomy. An MFA is 2 years of your life. So it's not like you have to pick academia or real world as your trajectory forever. If you choose to get your MFA, you have probably, presumably, been out in the real world before, or you will again after. And this also seems to come from an understanding that as a student, you have no life outside of that and you are completely disconnected from the real world. People say this. What is the real world? What is being out in the real world for most people? Because I can tell you what it was for me in my time between my degrees. It was a lot of just working. Maybe there's this romantic idea of going out in the real world, traveling. Few people are kind of financially privileged enough to be able to actually come into themselves as a writer in that way. But for most people, being out in the real world is going to work and probably not having much time or energy outside of that. That is the real world for most people. So I think acting like that will somehow better facilitate your writing skill is coming from a very inaccurate and romanticized idea of what being out in the real world means. A lot of the time people go back to school for their MFAs because that real world wasn't facilitating their writing practice. They were burned out from work. There was no time or energy left to write. Whereas as a student, they have support and they essentially get paid to write. That's why another reason I wanted to do my MFA is I wanted to get paid to write for a couple years. This idea that the real world will develop your craft, whereas an MFA will ruin it, to me comes from an extremely inaccurate idea of what being out in the real world is going to mean for most people. So I guess in some ways, as an MFA student, I'm just trying to escape that for a couple years. I'm just trying to escape the capitalist grind for a couple of years, you know? Why did you feel it necessary to pursue an MFA when you not only have an agent, but have also had multiple short stories published? I think just because of my personal goals for getting an MFA. If my goal to get an MFA was I want to publish more short fiction and I want to get a literary agent, then there would be no point. because I would have already achieved those things. But those just weren't my goals for getting an MFA. If that was all I wanted from my writing career and my existence as a writer was to publish short fiction and to get an agent, then I would have succeeded and I guess I could just check out now. But there's more, not just from my career, but from myself that I want as a writer. These two questions that are kind of the same. Who would you recommend to get an MFA in writing, and what type of writer would you recommend an MFA to? I can't really answer this question. I think this is just up to the individual. Is it something you want to do? And your reasons might be totally different from mine. Yeah, it's right for some people, it's not right for other people, but I think that the reasons why it may be right or not right for you are just very, very individual. Do you find it was important that you took time off after your undergrad before doing your MFA? Yes, absolutely. I remember when I was in my undergrad and I first realized I wanted to do an MFA and I was like, I'm gonna go straight into my MFA. And then every single MFA or person who had an MFA that I talked to said, do not go straight from your undergrad to your master's degree. Don't do it. You just risk being horribly burned out. If you're coming into a master's degree straight out of your bachelor's degree, you're probably kind of exhausted already. It can also risk making it feel like just one really, really long degree. And at a certain point, you kind of max out what you're getting out of it with no time in between. I did my bachelor's degree and I got to educate that version of Shaylin. But now, years have passed since I graduated and I'm a very different person and I'm a different writer. And I've done a lot of development for myself as a writer in between. And so now I get to educate a whole other different Shaylin. If I had done them back to back, I would have just been educating the same Shaylin. Don't know if I would have gotten as much out of it. I think for me, it feels really important that I took that time. I did my own growing as a writer, and now I get to educate myself as this whole other person. And then someone else said, I remember you mentioned during a vlog once that your original plan was to go to grad school around the time that the pandemic happened, so you had to postpone it. What made you decide to apply now? I wrapped up my undergraduate degree in the fall of 2019. My plan was to start applying for my MFA in the fall of 2020. So that would be for a 2021 start date. But then the pandemic happened right after I graduated university, which was great. I do know some people who did their master's degrees during the pandemic. Like early pandemic. They had to do most of it online. I get how for some people they just wanted to get it done. That's fair. But for me, I really wanted to make the most of the experience. In some ways, I felt like I wasted the first 2 years of my undergrad by just not being in the moment and enjoying it. And I really was like, I want to enjoy it to the fullest, right? I also at this point was really caught on this idea that I wanted to go abroad for my master's degree and do it in the UK. I had wanted to study abroad at some point, but then it didn't really work with my undergrad schedule. It would have put me a year behind. And I definitely didn't want to move to another continent to do grad school online. In the fall of 2021, back when we all thought that the pandemic was ending because we'd all gotten vaccinated, and so we thought that this was it and it was over forever, ha ha ha. I was like, okay, it's time. It's great. The pandemic's ending. I'm gonna go back to school now. I start kind of getting ready. I'm applying only to schools in the UK. So this would have been for a September 22 start date. January 2022, I'm working on my applications. Several things are becoming apparent. A, the pandemic is not over. It's the worst it's ever been. And so I started to realize that I was at the risk of getting into a UK school, paying international tuition to do grad school online. I was at a place in my life where I no longer wanted to move to the other side of the world. I was putting down roots as an adult. And this idea of moving to another continent to restart, especially for a program that's only 1 year, was actually just not appealing to me anymore. And third, the more that I looked into I just want to say that the reason why I was originally planning on going to school in the UK was A, because I wanted the chance to study and live abroad, and B, when I was in my undergrad, it was like a very kind of trendy thing to do. So many of the graduating fourth years in the cohorts above me were applying to schools in the UK. Many of my sessional instructors had studied at the UK. So these were programs that were talked up very highly to me. Programs like Edinburgh, East Anglia. These programs were very, very highly talked up to me as an undergrad. But as I started to get deeper in the application cycles, I started to realize how little funding there was going to be for me as an international student. You might be like, wasn't that obvious from the get-go? It's not necessarily obvious from the get-go. Schools are not clear clear about how much funding they do or do not give you, and I just could not afford to pay international tuition for a UK program out of pocket. So I decided not to apply that year. I just submitted one application just to test to see if my application was strong. I actually got in. This was for University of Edinburgh. As suspected, they didn't offer me any funding. So I decided then that I was going to apply the next year. So this would have been for 2023 start, fall 2023 start date. And I was just going to apply to one program in Canada. So I applied to this one program and then I got waitlisted and I did not get in. And that was crushing. Applied for this year. I learned my lesson to apply to more than just one program. So that's how I ended up finally going to grad school in 2024. Do you think getting an MFA is required to write contemporary literary fiction? Or could the next Lauren Groff, etc. come out of a background without higher education? Obviously, when you look at contemporary literary fiction, there is a MFA to debut literary fiction novelist pipeline. Certainly there's some correlation, but I think that's also probably due to the fact that MFAs appeal the most to literary fiction writers because academia is the most set up for writing a literary fiction novel. There's a pipeline there of get your undergraduate degree in writing, learn how to write a short story, want to break into actually the publishing world, do an MFA to help you write your first novel, sell the first novel. There we go. That's not necessarily the path for everyone, and it's definitely not necessary. Obviously, there's a lot of correlation, but that doesn't mean that it's a requirement by any means. What is the starting point for an MFA? Does one think I have lots of story ideas and I want to be a writer, or does one think I want to be a writer and an MFA will be good experience for that? Usually an MFA is not for a beginner writer. MFAs are competitive to get into. If you're coming in with no experience as a beginner wanting to learn how to write, you may have trouble getting into an MFA. I would say that the starting point for an MFA is usually a fairly experienced writer who's kind of like, I want to really take this to the next level in terms of academic study. It's usually not like, oh, I've decided I want to be a writer. How do I learn how to write? Bam, master's degree. The question that I got asked the most times, I got it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 times, was what is the difference between a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in writing? There's a lot of differences. First of all, obviously an MFA is just a more advanced degree. It's the difference between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in any subject, right? What's the difference between a master's in psychology and a bachelor's in psychology? Well, the master's in psychology is more advanced. A bachelor's degree is usually very course-based. You take a ton of courses. A lot of them won't even be writing courses, elective courses. Maybe you have like required foundational courses. And then you'll also have like your writing classes with like your core workshops maybe, and then your electives maybe. At least that's what it was for me. And in each class, you'll have like specific things you write for that class for that one semester. In a master's degree, it's more so thesis based. I do have some courses, but not a ton. I think there's only 7 courses that I have to take. It's not a lot of courses. A master's degree is more based around the writing of your thesis. So the primary mode of learning is, instead of being in coursework, it's on the writing of your thesis. So it's much more self-directed. Obviously, of course, the workload is higher. You are writing a full thesis, and just your courses, the courses you do have are much heavier. A lot of reading. They're usually much smaller courses. So rather than going and sitting in a big 50-person lecture, you're in a 5-person seminar, so you have to come and be prepared to really, really engage. MFAs also involve often a teaching component as a TA, or maybe even teaching a course, or even lecturing. Why did you pick the program that you picked? I applied to 3 schools this year and I only got accepted to 1. However, the one that I got accepted to was my first choice program. If I had gotten accepted to all 3, this is the one that I would have picked. I'm in Canada, there's not a lot of MFAs in writing. A lot of people asked me, why did you not consider programs in the States? To be honest, I didn't want to move to the States. There were good programs that appealed to me in Canada, and so there was no reason to move to the States when I don't want to. Program that I'm in was my first choice for a few reasons. First of all is for kind of lifestyle. I didn't want to move far away. I just wasn't at a point in my life where I felt like starting new somewhere else, right? Like I didn't want to move away from my whole social circle, really far from my family. In the time between like this admission cycle, so applying for my program, which was last year in the fall of 2023, and the previous admission cycle, I had gotten into a relationship that got really serious. Still is. We're still together. And I honestly just didn't want to move away from my girlfriend at what felt like a very important point in our relationship, right? Like, it's still fairly new. I'm trying to nurture something. I'm trying to build something with this person. And it just felt like it would be a really bad time to then be like, bye, I'm going to grad school far away. Also, within just the program itself, it was my first choice. The program that I'm in is really small, so you get a lot of attention from your supervisor. I am the only fiction student in my cohort. I am literally in a cohort of 4 people, and the program only takes 1 student per genre per year, so they take 1 fiction student. I just get a lot more attention from my supervisor than I would at most programs where you may only see your supervisor once in your whole degree. As well, my program has a really strong teaching emphasis, which was important to me, that I was actually going to be able to like take courses on teaching. Also, because it's a small program, I knew from knowing people who'd gone through the program that the funding situation was really good. For those factors, funding, teaching, a lot of attention from my supervisor, who I knew who the supervisor would be too. If you don't know who your supervisor is going to be, but I knew who the supervisor was, and it was someone that I wanted to work with. And then also the fact that I wouldn't have to completely upend my life and leave my friends and partner and everyone behind. That made it a very obvious first choice for me. A couple other questions that I got just about this specific program. Is there flexibility with genres and formats in your program? Yes, there is. Obviously, I applied as a fiction student, but not everyone remains in that pretty narrow genre that they apply with. I know someone who is technically under fiction, but is doing a graphic novel memoir as their thesis. I know someone who I think applied under screenwriting, but is building a video game. That kind of stuff is kind of trendy in MFAs right now, to be like breaking down the borders between genres. Also, to be clear, genres in academia means something very different than genres in publishing. When I say genres, I'm referring to genres in the academic sense, which means basically the format. So poetry, screenwriting, fiction, creative nonfiction, etc. Not genres in the publishing sense, which would be like, what is the genre of your book? Fantasy, sci-fi, literary fiction, horror, etc., etc., etc. My thesis is fiction, but the workshop I'm in is a multi-genre workshop where you literally can submit literally anything you want. Since I know you want to teach, are there TA opportunities for you or any creative writing pedagogy classes? Yes, I'm in a creative writing pedagogy class this semester. The focus on pedagogy is one of the reasons that this was my first choice program. And yes, there are TA opportunities. You have to have taken that teaching skills course in order to TA, but next year I'll be able to TA. And it's actually kind of expected, as it's considered like an important part of the program, the TAing of the introduction to writing class specifically. Okay, I got a couple questions about my thesis. Is your thesis novel one you already planned on writing, or is it a new idea? I got my idea for my thesis last summer, so like the summer of 2023, so a couple months before I started applying. So it's not a brand new idea, but it was new when I started applying, and I did talk about it in my applications. It's new in the sense that I've never talked about it on this channel before, so it's not an idea that you guys would be familiar with. What is your thesis about? I'm not going to tell you exactly what my thesis is about, but I can tell you that right now I'm applying for a research grant with my thesis, and so I can kind of tell you what the topic of my research is, and that research is kind of the research behind my thesis. So my research that I'm doing is on using queer theory to understand cult, which I'm so excited that I get to literally say in a couple years that like I have an MFA in like cult and queer theory. It's the most in-character thing ever, and I'm very excited about it. But that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to talk about what the book is about. Obviously, you can gather that it's going to be about something to do with cults and something to do with queer people, but that's everything I write, so you could have gathered. Okay, so now I wanted to cover some application advice. This was a fairly large section. What was the application process like is the first question here. The applications can take a long time. It's obviously going to depend school by school. The best way to get a sense of what you need to do is to look up the application requirements for your specific program, but typically you're going to need a statement of intent where you talk about why you want to do an MFA, who you are as a writer, like your kind of aesthetic and influences as a writer, things that have shaped you as a writer, previous academic experiences or mentors, any plans for your thesis project. There's a lot you have to cover, and sometimes in an extremely short word count. The statement of intent is the worst part. And then there's also a portfolio, which is going to depend on the school. They'll have requirements of how many pages you get. And then you usually need references. Typically it's 2 references. Ideally, at least one would be from a previous instructor. References, I think, most people are starting to realize there's a very gatekeepy and outdated practice. I personally used one of my writing profs and my agent as my references. And then transcript, a literary CV, and just like an application form. It's fairly significant, especially because they all have different requirements. So you can't really reuse stuff. Hi, Shannon. I'm going through the MFA application cycle this fall. Good luck. And it's such a scary process. I'd love to hear you talk generally about your experience with applying. How did you choose your writing sample? I also had a more specific question. A lot of MFA programs I'm applying to have a page limit of 20 to 25 pages double space for the writing sample. I could put together 2 of my 10-page stories, but I think my strongest piece is a 20-ish page short story. I've heard that you don't want to give the application committee any reason to reject you, so you should just submit your strongest work and nothing else. But I've also heard that it's important to display diversity in your work. Any thoughts on this? Love your work. You're one of my favorite short story writers, and I'm currently rereading a bunch of your stuff for inspiration guidance as I edit more for my portfolio. Thank you so much, and I hope that it helps, and good luck applying. I was there last year, and the year before, and the year before, so solidarity. This is a really good question. I fear I'm not the best person to answer it because I am not on these committees and I don't fully understand what goes into their decision making. That's the hard part, is that you don't really know what's going into their decision making, and that can make it really hard. I think that what you said about not giving them any reason to reject you is very true. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the programs that I got into versus the programs I did not get into. So over 3 years, I applied to 6 programs. The first year I applied to 1 program and got in. The next year I applied to 1 program, got waitlisted and did not get in. And then the third year I applied to 3 programs and got into 1. So I got into 2 out of 6 programs. Obviously, I don't know what went into these decisions. I don't know exactly why I was rejected from the programs I was rejected from. However, there is a very clear trend that I can observe. The 2 programs that I got accepted to were the programs where you only needed to submit a single genre of work in your portfolio. So I applied as a fiction student and I only had to submit fiction. The programs I did not get into were the programs that required you to submit multiple genres of work. I think I'm a pretty strong fiction applicant. I have a really robust portfolio where I have a ton of work to choose from. I have a lot of publication credits on my CV. My references are talking about how great of a fiction writer I am. As a poetry applicant, there's not much there. I don't have enough poetry to fill a poetry portfolio, let alone do it well. You know, like in the, say, 15 pages of poetry I had to submit, maybe only 4 pages of those were strong. I think it's a pretty clear trend that I can see that anytime I had to submit genres outside of fiction, I did not get accepted. Basically, anytime I had to submit poetry. A lot of programs now pride themselves on being interdisciplinary, and so they look for interdisciplinary applicants who can write in multiple genres. I am not an interdisciplinary writer, really. I really just write fiction. And so as an interdisciplinary applicant, I'm not a super strong applicant, and it's like you were saying, I gave them reason to reject me. And that reason was in my poetry, because the poetry was not super strong. Even if they were really impressed at the fiction, they're looking for interdisciplinary applicants, and then they would look at my poetry and it's just not very good. Whereas any time that I could just apply with just fiction, I got in. Maybe there's other reasons why I didn't get into those programs. However, I think the most likely reason was the fact that they were looking for multidisciplinary writers, and that I am not. I had to submit some work that was not as strong as I would have liked because it's not in a genre that I am a strong writer. That whole idea of don't give them any reason to reject you, I think is fairly true, and I think that that's probably why I didn't get into the programs I didn't get into. When you're picking work for your portfolio, and don't take my word as gospel, I don't really know what I'm talking about here. I'm just going to tell you about how I did it. First of all, I would say that it's probably better to go with short fiction than a novel opening. This is advice that I was given by many professors in undergrad when applying for an MFA. A really good 20-page short story is way more impressive than a really good 20-page novel opening. A 20-page novel opening is just way easier to write than a 20-page short story. A good short story shows your full understanding of narrative and narrative arc. A strong novel opening really just shows your line-level writing craft ability and your ability to introduce stuff. But it could go nowhere. It could fall off. We don't even know if you've completed this novel, right? So I would say you mentioned only short fiction, but that's just to say that typically I've been told that you should at least have one short story in there. I did use some novel openings in my applications, but I always had at least one short story. I did not submit the same work to all the programs I applied to because they all had different page counts, and so it was like trying to find stuff that could like fit together to make the page count. When you're selecting the work, I like to think, not just is this work my best, but what am I showcasing with this work? The diversity point is a good one, and it's something that I was also caught up on. It would be so easy if we knew the stylistic preferences of the people who were making the decisions, right? One person might be really, really impressed by really rich, complex prose, whereas someone else might be super off put by that and might really, really favor sleek, straightforward writing. I kind of tried to display different styles when I was picking work. So if I had one work that was maybe more linguistically complex, pair it with something that was a little more streamlined. I also tried to balance between more experimental forms and more traditional ones because, again, some application committees might be like, ooh, it's avant-garde, it's experimental, that's really exciting. Someone else could look at that work, might think that it's trying too hard and wonder what your ability to just write a normal story is. So I kind of tried to balance the styles. I would just ask yourself, what qualities am I displaying with this work? What portrait of a writer am I painting? Which one best showcases who I am as a writer? How did you secure funding? This is the biggest piece of advice I received, that is to make sure you have partial or full funding. This was also advice that I was always given. As an undergrad, I was always told, if they're not paying you to do it, don't do it. Like, don't go into debt for your MFA. Now, maybe if you have a lot of money hanging around, you don't care, but personally, I wanted to get paid to do my MFA. This is a really, really important question, and I'm actually surprised that nobody asked, how are you paying for it? I expected that to be one of the biggest questions, but I will tell you right now. When I was accepted to my program, they automatically gave me a relatively large fellowship that covered all of the tuition for the year and then some as well. Automatically, upon acceptance, all of my tuition was covered and I had a bit extra. However, that bit extra was not enough to live on. My program nominated me for a provincial scholarship that was quite sizable, and I ended up getting it. This is common, at least in Canada, that your program will nominate you, so you don't have to do the work, they just nominate you for these bigger provincial awards, but there's no guarantee you'll get them. I feel very lucky that I got this one because it was a lot of money. So that's how I funded my first year of study, was with that automatic fellowship that my school gives everyone upon acceptance, this big scholarship that they nominated me for. So I actually didn't have to apply for funding for my first year. For my second year, I'm currently applying for a big research grant called SSHRC. If you've done a master's degree in Canada, you are probably familiar with SSHRC. It's the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. It's a lot of money. They just raised it this year as well. It's $27,000. So it's a very significant amount of money. Basically, it's a nationwide program that any master's student in the arts who's doing a thesis, like it doesn't apply to course-based master's programs, but if you're doing any kind of like dissertation or research, then you can apply for SSHRC. Each university is allotted a certain number of SSHRCs that they can award, and so then you apply within your university. So I'm currently applying for SSHRC. I'm really just hoping I will get it. I feel very lucky that my supervisor is working very closely with me on it. Obviously, it's a little tricky with fine arts because these grants are not set up for fine arts projects. You are allowed to apply, but sometimes the committees don't understand that you could even be doing a creative project as a master's. thesis, so I have to pitch my novel as academic research, basically. So sometimes when you're securing funding, if it's like academic broadly, more broad academic funding, you really have to come at it from a very academic perspective. I'm really hoping that I get the SSHRC grant for next year. And then also in my second year, I'll be able to TA. Some of those TA positions actually pay quite well. And there's also a scholarship that I plan to apply for where you design a course and then the university will pay you to teach that course. In my teaching skills course, I'm designing a course, so I'll apply for that scholarship with that course. So yeah, that's how my funding worked for me. Do you think that being a published author, especially having so many short stories published and in different / prestigious literary journals, helps you get accepted? Do you recommend / suggest trying to get your work published before applying to MFAs to help your application, or do you think it wouldn't make too much of a difference? I do definitely think it helped. Publication history shows a seriousness. It also shows a quality of work. If I give them 20 pages of work and then I give them a CV that shows that I've published 20 short stories, then they can go, oh, not only is this author giving me 20 pages of work, but they're also showing me that they've written hundreds of pages of good work. Whereas if someone gives you just 20 pages of work and no CV, maybe this is the only 20 pages of good work that they have. It is definitely something they look for. That said, is it impossible to get into, do you need it to get an MFA? Not necessarily. There are people in my cohort with very minimal publication credits. It's not the only thing and it's not the most important thing, but yes, it can help. If you want to apply this year, I wouldn't hold off on it because you don't have publication credits. But in the meantime, I would keep trying to get publication credits. And if you don't get in, that could be a way to strengthen your application next year. I went for a little walk. I bought this plant while I was on my walk. Everyone meet my new plant. Okay, I got a couple questions about the program structure. What type of courses are you in? Is an MFA mostly critique groups? So I'm in 3 courses right now. Typically, full-time for a master's student is 2 courses, but I'm trying to get my elective credit done. At a lot of universities, an MFA is like all workshop or like seminar type classes. I know someone doing their MFA at another university and all the classes are like workshops for different genres. So like fiction workshop, poetry workshop. Because my program is so small, there's not enough students to make a master's workshop. Like I'm the only fiction master's student. So I'm in a multi-genre workshop that is like about half MFA students and MFA students of all genres and half 4th year undergraduate students. Next semester, I'll be in a fiction workshop with the 4th year fiction students. So it'll be all 4th year fiction students and me. When it comes to workshops, I've been there and done that. You know, I did so many workshops in undergrad. I don't need tons of workshops, so I only have to take 2 workshops for my degree. My other course I'm in my teaching skills course, and then I'm taking an elective. In my program, we need to do 1 elective, which can be literally anything, but because the program is so small, there are no writing electives at the MFA level. I decided to just take an undergraduate fiction elective, so I'm taking writing sex and fiction as my elective, which I just thought would be really interesting and also just seemed like it would be unlike any course I'd ever taken before. I think next semester I'm in just like a grad seminar, which I don't really know what it's going to be like. I don't think it'll be workshop, but I think it'll be more like readings, discussions on writing. I'm kind of interested to see what that will be like. Will you be teaching some courses? And if so, which ones? I'm from a country in which research programs often require you to be a lecturer, and I wondered if it was the same in Canada. Next year, I'll be TAing the Intro to Writing course, where the way it's set up at my program is they have like 1 section a week with the professor who lectures, and then they get split up into groups of like 20 to 30 with their TAs, and then as a TA, you prep the material based on whatever the prof lectured on that week. But I'll be doing that next year. And then I talked about it earlier, but I would like to, at some point, try and teach this course that I'm designing because I'm really excited about my course. The course I'm designing is on experimental forms in fiction, or like writing experimental fiction. I'm just like really excited about it. Okay, so now we just have a bunch of MISC questions. Let's go through these. We can do this, you guys. So the first one, has anyone from your program recognized you from YouTube? I will tell you something, which is that most of the time when people recognize you from YouTube, they don't tell you. I thought that I went through my whole undergraduate degree without people knowing, for the most part, that I had a YouTube channel. Turns out everyone knew and they just didn't tell me. Maybe I've been recognized more than I know of. However, yes, I have been recognized. Will your MFA interfere with publishing your work via your agent? Those things are not conflict of interest. My agent was one of my references, so there's no reason why I can't have a book on submission while also being in grad school, right? My supervisor was really excited that I had an agent and that I was kind of at that stage in my career. I guess it's pretty uncommon that students are entering an MFA with an agent. Obviously, it is an extra thing going on, so it could at certain points culminate in an insane amount of work for me. What are you the most excited for? There's a lot I'm excited for. A, getting some teaching opportunities. I'm really excited to get to teach. And also just getting to work more on my thesis. I am really excited about my thesis project, and I'm just really excited to be able to be in an environment where I get to write a book with so much support. I'm really thankful for my supervisor. When I've talked to him, he's basically been like, consider me someone who's kind of at your disposal as much as you need. I'm really, really excited to get to write a book in this more collaborative way where I have like a mentor. I think that's really exciting, and I think it's something I'm gonna learn a lot from. What was your favorite and least favorite assigned reading? This is hard to say so far because I'm so early in the program. One of my courses, my teaching skills course, obviously all the readings have been on teaching, and then the other course that I have assigned readings for is my writing sex and fiction elective. I would say that my least favorite readings have probably come from that class, just because that class covers a whole range of ways to write sex, and there's some things that we've read in the class that are just not to my taste, and that I would never seek out. There was some werewolf erotica, just cause, you know, not my thing. Not judging, not my thing. My favorite, we read Crafting the Real World by Matthew Salesi's for my teaching skills course, and it was great. Loved it. Is there a bias in MFAs to favor non-speculative fiction? In some, yes. I would say so far in mine, no. When I did my undergraduate, there was a bias against speculative fiction. We weren't supposed to write genre fiction in most classes. That was starting to loosen even by the time I graduated, and like I took a course on like writing horror and stuff, which was super cool. Now I'm seeing, like I'm doing my teaching practicum in an undergraduate workshop, and it's literally a speculative fiction workshop. It seems that the only literary fiction, no genre fiction criteria is just completely gone, and if anything, I'm finding a bit of a bias against literary fiction. Now I'm finding that it's kind of not cool anymore to enjoy literary fiction. I mean, my supervisor, I think, would have let me do literally anything. I am writing literary fiction for my thesis because that's what I write, and my supervisor is excited about that. I think he would have been excited about literally anything. In fact, when I first went to talk to him about my project, the brief proposal he had read, he actually thought that it was fantasy. He was like, so that just depends on the program, but I think a lot of programs are changing, and I think that there's been a lot of change in this. 10 years ago, most programs were heavily literary fiction focused. Now it seems that that's changed in the past 5 years quite dramatically in a lot of departments. How do you balance the MFA and your relationship and YouTube? Do you have to make sacrifices to prioritize your time? I mean, yes, you do always have to make sacrifices to prioritize your time. I would say that I balance those three things by not really focusing much on YouTube, which is obvious. I haven't been posting that much. It's just not a priority for me right now. For this question, you listed three things: school, my relationship, and YouTube. I have more things in my life than just those three things, and the other things not mentioned are usually the things that I sacrifice. Other hobbies are the things that I have kind of put to the side. I've definitely had a lot less downtime. How does it feel to get grades on your work again? Does it affect your enjoyment of the writing process? This is interesting. I honestly haven't gotten any grades on my writing yet. I've only submitted one piece in my writing workshop, and I didn't get a grade on it. I don't think the prof is actually my supervisor. I don't think he releases the grades until the end of the semester. Grades are something that I have a complex relationship with. Growing up, I derived too much of my self-worth from my grades. And by this I mean in high school, elementary school. And throughout university, I started to undo that, but obviously getting graded on something creative can make you somewhat dependent on those grades for then creative validation. I think I've done a good job of separating my grades from my self-worth. I don't really know because I haven't gotten graded on any writing yet. I think I have a much healthier relationship with grading than I did when I was in my undergrad. So, I mean, for my thesis, it's not really I'm gonna get a grade on my thesis. You know, at the end you defend your thesis and they decide that it's enough to fulfill the completion of a master's degree or it's not. I'm not really stressed about that. I know that my supervisor won't encourage me to defend until the book is ready. So doesn't it add any more pressure to get published? What happens post MFA if one realizes there aren't many ideas worth publishing? I'm gonna address the second part of that question first. What happens post MFA if one realizes there aren't many ideas worth publishing? I just don't think that that's gonna be a problem for me. I've been writing my whole life. I always have ideas that are worth writing to me, and that's just not something that I'm concerned about. If you are genuinely like, I don't know if I have enough ideas to write, an MFA may not be the right path. In terms of does it add any more pressure to be published, to me it takes it away. I was struggling with not selling my book. For the past couple years, it's been really quite hard on me. All the things that make my work do well in academia are the things that publishing doesn't like. In academia, you're praised for innovation and experimentation, whereas then you try to publish that work and the response is, why isn't this a normal book? Not enough people will buy it. It's too niche. It's too risky. At least that's been my experience trying to publish my work. In academia, no one cares about that because in academia, they pretend money doesn't exist and it's just about your ideas and your craft. So for me, it kind of takes the pressure off because I have something else to make me feel like I'm doing something with my life, progressing with my life. It has been helping me manage the disappointment of having not sold a book yet, which has been really challenging for me, and I'm not going to get into that too much, but being in an environment where all those things that I've been told, no, we don't like this, suddenly are getting praised again. Not gonna lie, it's been nice. It's a welcome change, I can tell you that. It feels like I have more time now. I'm not waiting for a book deal to change my life. I have 2 years that I can focus on writing, and hopefully, for the love of God, in that time I sell a book. Whereas before, when I was just working the same job that I'd been doing for a really long time, it felt like I was stuck and I was stagnant and I wasn't going anywhere, and I felt like I was just waiting to sell a book and that wasn't happening, and I was banging my head against a wall trying to sell a book and not getting through with it. So it felt like I was just waiting for that to change my life, whereas now I feel like I have 2 years where I feel kind of really happy and excited about where I am and what I'm doing with my life, that there's a little less pressure to sell a book immediately. There is still a pressure. Don't get me wrong, it still sucks to spend 2 years on submission and not sell a book. It sucks. And it's not something that I want to talk about that much, but starting the MFA has helped with that. Hi, I also started my MFA this year and I have questions about making connections. As in, how do you do it? We're about halfway through the semester and I haven't been able to break the ice of the initial awkwardness/distance. It's so odd being really vulnerable with these people in workshop and not being able to connect with them outside the classroom. I'm writing this the morning after an excruciating event where I kind of just stood around and watched people hold conversations while I wanted to sink into the earth. Any advice? Thanks and good luck with your MFA. I don't know if I'm the person that you should ask on advice on how to make friends and not be awkward. I do have one thing to say, and this might seem weird, but hear me out. Make a group chat. When I was in my undergraduate degree, my cohort was known for being especially close. Like my fiction cohort, we were so close. And in the other genres, people weren't that close. And in the other years, people weren't that close. I was talking to the other people in my MFA cohort, and I was saying how after workshop, me and my cohort would always go to the pub together. And everyone was like, oh my God, you guys would go out to the pub? That's so cute. I wish my cohort did that and wish my cohort was so close. It's because we made a group chat. It really breaks the ice. It makes it easier to make plans. That's a great place to start. Also, just organizing some group event outside of class. Sometimes it can be nice if you want a school-related excuse. Say you're all working on a project or funding application, being like, hey, do you want to just we can all get together and work on this together? I think building those bonds outside of class really helps. It can be hard to feel close to people when you're only interacting with them in a classroom setting, but that's my advice from someone who I can't say is particularly good at making friends. My question is related to AI and writing. What is the general consensus around AI in the writing academic space? Are any of your classes addressing the implications of generative AI? The general consensus around AI in academia is that it's bad, and we don't like it. I think all of my professors have addressed AI, either in course policies, saying if you submit anything using generative AI, you will receive a 0. In my teaching skills course, it's something that we've talked about a little bit, God, the kids are using AI. yeah, the general consensus is that it's bad. We don't support it. As writing departments, there's still like, it's so new that it's like, how do we address this? How do we put this in our course policies? I met some of them at the first years, undergraduate first years at an event, and it's something that it's weighing on them. They're like, what are we supposed to do about the fact that we're getting degrees in writing and other people are just using AI? Are our degrees going to be useless? Is our whole passion for writing going to be useless if people are just doing it with AI by the time we graduate? These poor 18-year-olds who are starting an education in writing and are feeling so discouraged because of this AI boom. So yeah, it's come up quite a lot, always as a problem. No one is like, ooh, AI, the next big thing. How do we use it to improve our craft? No, it's not something that there's really any favor towards. Oh my god, this video was so long. It took me a solid 2.5 hours to film. Pray for me that I have to edit this. I'm gonna end this video real quick because the battery is dying. If you have any lingering questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll answer them there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!